The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's Hospital cast an unforgiving glow over room 312 as I cradled my daughter Emma, for what felt like the 1,000th time in 36 hours. Her tiny fingers wrapped around mine with surprising strength, and I marveled at how something so small could make me feel so complete. The October air outside carried the crisp promise of autumn in Minneapolis, but inside this sterile room, time seemed suspended in a bubble of new parent exhaustion and overwhelming love. "She's perfect," I whispered, brushing my lips against Emma's downy head. The scent of her, that indescribable newborn sweetness mixed with hospital soap, filled my senses. Every fiber of my being ached from the 22 hours of labor that had brought her into this world, but holding her made every contraction, every moment of pain, worth it. My husband David should have been here to share this moment. He'd stepped out an hour ago, claiming he needed coffee and some fresh air. "The hospital cafeteria coffee tastes like motor oil," he'd said with that crooked smile I'd fallen in love with 8 years ago. "I'll grab something decent from that place down the street," I understood. The past 2 days had been a whirlwind for both of us. From the moment my water broke at 3 a.m. in our cramped one-bedroom apartment in Uptown, everything had moved at lightning speed. David had been my rock through the worst of it, holding my hand during contractions, feeding me ice chips, taking photos of Emma's first moments that we'd treasure forever. At least I thought we would treasure them forever. The door to my room opened with a soft whoosh, and I looked up expecting to see David with 2 steaming cups of that Ethiopian blend he loved. Instead, a nurse I didn't recognize peered in, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. "Mrs. Richardson? I'm Sarah, the evening shift nurse. How are you feeling?" "Tired but happy," I replied, adjusting Emma in my arms. When you've got someone this beautiful to look at, it's hard to complain. Sarah smiled as she checked my IV and glanced at the monitors. "She is gorgeous. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and look at that head of hair. Your husband must be over the moon." "He is," I said, though something nagged at me. David had seemed distant since Emma's birth, almost mechanical in his interactions with her. I'd chalked it up to new father nerves and exhaustion. After all, we'd been together for 8 years, married for 4. We'd planned this pregnancy, saved up for it, painted the nursery together last month. He'd read every parenting book Amazon had to offer. "Where is he now?" Sarah asked, noting something on my chart. "Getting coffee. He should be back soon." But as the minutes ticked by, my confidence wavered. David had been gone for over an hour now. The coffee shop he mentioned was only a 5-minute walk from the hospital. Even allowing for a line and some time to decompress, this felt excessive. I tried calling his cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. His cheerful recorded voice felt like a mockery. "You've reached David Richardson. Leave a message and I'll get back to you." The same message he'd had for 3 years, the one I'd teased him about updating. Emma stirred in my arms, making the small mewling sounds that meant she was getting hungry. I lifted my hospital gown and guided her to my breast, wincing as she latched on. The lactation consultant had warned me it would be uncomfortable at first, but this sharp tugging sensation felt like my body was being claimed by this tiny person, who depended entirely on me. As I fed my daughter, I gazed out the window at the Minneapolis skyline. The autumn sun was setting, painting the glass towers in shades of gold and amber. Somewhere out there, David was walking around with his thoughts, probably overwhelmed by the magnitude of becoming a father. I could understand that. The responsibility felt enormous. This perfect little human was counting on us to keep her safe, fed, loved, and guided through life. "We're going to be such good parents," I murmured to Emma, stroking her cheek with my finger. "Daddy's just processing everything. He'll be back soon, and then we can start our real life together." The October evening stretched into night, and still no David. I called his phone 6 more times, each call going to voicemail. By 10 p.m., worry had transformed into something sharper. Fear mixed with an emotion I didn't want to acknowledge. Suspicion. Sarah returned for her midnight check, finding me wide awake and staring at the door. "Still no husband?" she asked gently. I shook my head, not trusting my voice. "Honey, sometimes new dads need time to process. It's a big change." "He's been gone for 8 hours," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Something's not right." Sarah squeezed my shoulder. "Try to get some rest. I'm sure he'll be back in the morning," with an explanation and probably flowers to apologize. But I couldn't sleep. Emma dozed peacefully in the bassinet beside my bed, her tiny chest rising and falling in perfect rhythm, while I stared at the ceiling tiles and tried to make sense of David's disappearance. In 8 years together, he'd never simply vanished, without explanation. Even during our worst fights, he'd been communicative, responsible. The night crawled by with agonizing slowness. Every footstep in the hallway made my heart leap, hoping it was David coming back to explain himself. Nurses came and went, checking on Emma and me, offering gentle smiles and reassurance that everything would work out. At 6 a.m., I finally dozed fitfully, exhaustion overriding anxiety. I dreamed of David holding Emma, his face full of the love and wonder I'd expected to see. In the dream, he was apologizing for his absence, explaining that he'd gotten overwhelmed and needed to walk and think. He was back now, ready to be the father and husband we'd planned for him to be. I woke to the sound of the door opening, and for a split second, relief flooded through me. David was back. Everything would be okay. But the person who entered wasn't my husband. A man in his 30s wearing a rumpled brown suit stood in the doorway, holding a manila envelope and looking distinctly uncomfortable. He had thinning hair and tired eyes, the look of someone who'd been up all night dealing with unpleasant business. "Mrs. Richardson? I'm sorry to bother you. I'm Thomas Caldwell, a process server. I have some documents for you." The words hit me like a physical blow. Process server, documents. My mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. Behind him, I caught a glimpse of David in the hallway. His back turned, his shoulders rigid with tension. "I don't understand," I said, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. Thomas Caldwell stepped into the room, his discomfort palpable. "Ma'am, I'm required by law to serve you with these papers. I'm sorry about the timing." He handed me the manila envelope, his eyes avoiding mine. My hand shook as I took it, and Emma, sensing my distress, began to fuss in her bassinet. With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of legal documents. The header made my blood run cold. Petition for dissolution of marriage. David was divorcing me. The papers swam before my eyes as I tried to process what I was reading. Filed yesterday, less than 24 hours after Emma's birth, while I was in labor. While I was bringing our child into the world, David had been meeting with lawyers, signing papers, planning his exit. "There must be some mistake," I whispered. But even as I said it, I knew there wasn't. The signature at the bottom was unmistakably David's, the same looping D and R I'd seen him practice when we were first dating, the same signature on our marriage certificate 4 years ago. Thomas Caldwell cleared his throat. "I'm truly sorry, Mrs. Richardson. If you have any questions about the documents, you'll need to contact your attorney." "My attorney?" I laughed, a harsh sound that made Emma's crying intensify. "I don't have an attorney. I gave birth yesterday. I thought I had a husband." The process server looked like he wanted to disappear through the floor. "Again, I'm very sorry. I hope things work out for you and your baby." He left quickly, and I was alone with Emma and the papers that had just destroyed my world. My daughter's cries filled the room, demanding attention, food, comfort, things I wasn't sure I could provide when my own world was crumbling. I lifted Emma from her bassinet and held her against my chest, her warmth grounding me even as my mind reeled. Through the window, I could see David in the parking lot below, walking toward a car I didn't recognize, a red sedan that definitely wasn't our aging Honda Civic. As I watched, a woman got out of the driver's seat. Even from 3 floors up, I could see she was young, probably mid-20s, with long blonde hair that caught the morning sunlight. She hugged David tightly, and he kissed her forehead with a tenderness that felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Everything clicked into place with sickening clarity. The late nights at the office, the hushed phone calls he'd take in the bathroom, the way he'd seemed distracted during my pregnancy, going through the motions of preparing for fatherhood while his heart was clearly elsewhere. David had been planning this for months, maybe years. I sank back into the hospital bed, Emma still crying in my arms, and stared at the divorce papers until the words blurred together. Irreconcilable differences, division of assets, custody arrangements. My grip on Emma tightened protectively. Whatever David's plan was, whatever had driven him to this moment of breathtaking cruelty, he wasn't taking my daughter from me. She might be the only good thing left in my life, but she was mine to protect. Mine to love, mine to raise. As Emma finally quieted against my chest, I made a silent promise to both of us. I would figure out how to survive this. I would uncover the truth about David's betrayal. And I would make sure that my daughter never had to wonder if she was wanted. Because she was wanted. By me. Completely and unconditionally. even if her father had just walked away from both of us without a word of explanation. 3 weeks after David served me with divorce papers in the hospital, I sat in the cramped office of Rebecca Torres, the only family law attorney in Minneapolis who'd agreed to meet with me pro bono. Her office was on the second floor of a converted Victorian house in the Whittier neighborhood, wedged between a used bookstore and a vintage clothing shop. The October air carried the scent of burning leaves through her single window, and Emma slept peacefully in her car seat at my feet. "I have to ask," Rebecca said, reviewing the divorce petition for the third time. "Did you have any indication that your husband was planning this?" I shifted uncomfortably in the worn leather chair, Emma's diaper bag sliding off my shoulder. At 28, I felt ancient, exhausted in a way that went beyond new mother tiredness. The past 3 weeks had been a blur of sleepless nights, endless feedings, and desperate phone calls trying to understand what had happened to my marriage. "None," I said honestly. "I mean, he'd been working longer hours, but we were saving for the baby. He said his firm was busy." I paused, remembering details that now seemed significant. "He did seem distracted during my pregnancy, but I thought he was just nervous about becoming a father." Rebecca nodded, making notes on a yellow legal pad. She was in her 40s, with graying hair and laugh lines that suggested she'd found ways to maintain perspective despite dealing with family crises. Daily, her office walls were covered with children's drawings, thank you notes from clients, she'd explained, and somehow their cheerful colors made me feel slightly less alone. "The timing is unusual," she said carefully. "Most people don't file for divorce the day after their child is born unless there are extenuating circumstances, such as infidelity, financial problems. Sometimes people discover they're not the biological parent." She looked at me directly. "Is there any chance Emma is David's daughter?" I said firmly. "We were together when she was conceived. I was never with anyone else. I had to ask. Now, let's talk about what you're dealing with. Your husband filed for dissolution citing irreconcilable differences, which is standard. He's requesting joint custody of Emma and an equitable division of assets." She flipped through more pages. "Do you own your home?" "We rent a 1-bedroom apartment in Uptown." The words came out flat, emotionless. Everything about my life sounded so small when reduced to legal terminology. Any significant assets? Savings accounts, investments, retirement funds? I almost laughed. "We have about $3,000 in checking and maybe $1,500 in savings. David has a 401k through his law firm, but it's not much. We're both drowning in student loans." "His law firm?" Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "He's an attorney?" "Corporate law at Henderson, Mills and Associates downtown. He graduated from William Mitchell 3 years ago." A memory surfaced. David studying for the bar exam at our kitchen table. Me bringing him coffee and encouraging him through the stress. It felt like a lifetime ago. Rebecca was quiet for a moment, and I could see her processing this information. "Sarah, I need to be direct with you. If your husband is an attorney, he's likely been planning this divorce carefully. The timing suggests he wanted to establish certain facts, like being present for the birth, showing initial involvement with the child, while also protecting himself legally." "What do you mean?" "By filing immediately after Emma's birth, he establishes paternity, while also creating a paper trail showing he took action quickly. It could be a strategy to argue that the marriage was already over, that he tried to make it work through the pregnancy but realized it wasn't sustainable." The clinical way she explained it made my stomach turn. "So he used me, used the pregnancy." "It's possible. I've seen similar tactics." She leaned forward, her expression softening. "But that doesn't mean he'll win. We need to focus on what's best for Emma and what you need to rebuild your life." Over the next hour, Rebecca walked me through the divorce process, explaining terms like temporary orders and parenting plans that made my head spin. Emma woke up hungry, and I found myself nursing her in a lawyer's office while discussing custody schedules for a man who'd abandoned us both without explanation. "I want to understand why," I said, as Emma finished eating. "Why now? Why this way?" "We were happy, Rebecca. At least I thought we were." Sometimes the why matters for closure, but legally it rarely changes the outcome. Minnesota is a no-fault divorce state, which means we can't use his affair, if there is one, to influence asset division or custody. Affair? The word hit me like a slap. Rebecca studied my face carefully. "You mentioned he was working late, seemed distracted. And the timing of this divorce, combined with his legal background, suggests significant premeditation. In my experience, when someone plans an exit this carefully, there's usually another person involved." I thought about the blonde woman I'd seen from the hospital window, the way David had kissed her forehead. My chest tightened with a familiar ache that had become my constant companion over the past 3 weeks. I saw him with someone, I admitted. At the hospital after he served me, a young woman with blonde hair. Do you know who she is? No, I've never seen her before. Rebecca made another note. We might want to look into that. While infidelity won't change the legal outcome, it could give us insight into his motivations and timeline. After the meeting, I drove Emma back to our apartment. My apartment now, since David had moved out while I was still in the hospital. He'd taken his clothes, his books, his coffee maker, and about half of everything else, leaving behind a space that felt hollowed out and strange. I'd been staying with my sister Jennifer in Bloomington since being discharged, but I knew I couldn't impose much longer. Jenny had her own family, 2 kids under 5 and a husband who worked construction. Their 3-bedroom rambler was bursting at the seams without adding a new mother and infant to the mix. You can stay as long as you need, Jenny had insisted, but I could see the strain around her eyes. Her husband Mark was patient and kind, but their quiet conversations stopped whenever I entered the room. That evening, after Emma was asleep, I sat at Jenny's kitchen table with my laptop, trying to piece together the puzzle of my husband's betrayal. I started with the obvious, David's social media accounts, but found nothing unusual. His Facebook profile still listed him as married to me, and his last post was a photo of Emma in the hospital with the caption, "Welcome to the world, beautiful girl." The hypocrisy of it made me sick. I tried searching for the blonde woman, but without a name or any identifying information, it was hopeless. I scrolled through David's LinkedIn connections, looking for young women at his law firm or in his professional network, but everyone looked professionally appropriate and middle-aged. Frustrated, I opened our joint bank account online, something I hadn't checked in weeks. What I found there made my blood run cold. David had been systematically moving money out of our accounts for 3 months. Small amounts at first, $50 here, $100 there, but in the weeks leading up to Emma's birth, the transfers had increased. Our savings account, which should have had close to $4,000, was down to $800. He'd been financing his exit strategy with our money. Money we'd saved for Emma's needs, for my maternity leave, for the unexpected expenses that come with a new baby. My hands shook as I screenshotted the transactions and emailed them to Rebecca. This wasn't just abandonment, it was theft. The next morning, I drove back to our apartment to pack my things. I'd been avoiding it, not ready to face the physical evidence of David's departure, but I needed clothes that fit my post-pregnancy body, and Emma's things from the nursery we'd so carefully prepared. The apartment felt like a museum of my former life. David's absence was everywhere. The empty spot where his recliner used to sit, the bathroom counter where his shaving cream and aftershave had been, the closet with his side completely bare. But it was Emma's nursery that broke me completely. We'd painted it together last month, a soft yellow since we'd wanted to be surprised by the baby's gender. David had spent hours assembling the crib, cursing at the incomprehensible instructions while I laughed and handed him the wrong screws on. Purpose. The walls were covered with woodland creatures I'd painted freehand, foxes and rabbits and wise owls that were supposed to watch over our daughter as she slept. Now the room felt like a shrine to expectations that had been shattered. The crib still held the mobile we'd chosen together, dancing elephants that played Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, but everything felt tainted by David's betrayal. I was packing Emma's clothes into a garbage bag when I heard footsteps in the hallway. My heart jumped, thinking David had come back, but instead, our neighbor Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway. She was in her 70s, a widow who'd lived in the building for 20 years and kept track of everyone's comings and goings. "Sarah, dear," she said, her voice gentle. "I heard about David leaving. I wanted to check on you." I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. "I'm okay, Mrs. Chen. Just packing some things." She stepped into the nursery, looking around at the cheerful decorations with sad eyes. He seemed like such a nice young man. Always polite, always held the door. He was, I said, and meant it. That was the part that hurt most. David hadn't been a monster. He'd been kind, funny, responsible. The man who'd walked out on us was someone I didn't recognize. "Can I tell you something?" Mrs. Chen said carefully. "I hope you don't think I'm meddling." I looked up from the clothes I was folding. "What is it?" "About 3 months ago, I started seeing a young woman coming to visit. Always during the day, when you were at work. She had a key." My stomach dropped. "What did she look like?" "Blonde hair, very pretty. Mid-20s, I'd guess. She drove a red car, the same woman from the hospital parking lot. David had been bringing her to our apartment. Our home, for months while I was at work, unknowing and trusting. Did you ever see them together? Mrs. Chen nodded reluctantly. Once, about 6 weeks ago. They were on the balcony talking. She seemed upset about something, and he was trying to comfort her. 6 weeks ago, I'd been 7 months pregnant. Excited about Emma's arrival, planning our future as a family. Meanwhile, David had been planning his escape with another woman in the home we shared. I should have said something, Mrs. Chen continued. But I thought maybe she was a friend, or someone from work. I didn't want to cause trouble if there was an innocent explanation. It's not your fault, I said, though part of me wished she had said something. Maybe if I'd known sooner, I could have confronted David, tried to save our marriage before Emma was born. Maybe my daughter wouldn't have to grow up with divorced parents. But as I looked around the nursery we'd prepared with such hope, I realized that was naive thinking. David's betrayal was too calculated, too thorough. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a marriage that could be saved with counseling. This was a man who'd made his choice months ago, and had simply been waiting for the right moment to execute his plan. After Mrs. Chen left, I finished packing in a haze of grief and anger. Every item I placed in boxes felt like another piece of my old life being sealed away. The breast pump I'd registered for. The stack of parenting books David and I had read together. The photo from our last anniversary dinner, where we'd talked about baby names and argued playfully about whether to find out the gender. As I carried the last box to my car, I made a promise to Emma, who was sleeping peacefully in her car seat. I would find out exactly what David had done and why. I would make sure he couldn't take advantage of us financially, and I would build us a life that was better than anything he could have given us. Because if David thought he could discard us like yesterday's newspaper, he was about to learn just how strong a mother protecting her child could be. The law offices of Henderson, Mills and Associates occupied 3 floors of a gleaming glass tower in downtown Minneapolis, the kind of place that screamed success and exclusivity. I stood across the street on a cold November morning, Emma bundled against my chest in a baby carrier, watching lawyers in expensive suits hurry through the revolving doors. 6 weeks had passed since David served me with divorce papers, and I'd spent every one of those days uncovering the truth about my husband's double life. What I'd discovered was worse than I'd imagined. You sure about this? My sister Jenny asked, adjusting her own coat against the November wind. She'd insisted on coming with me for moral support, leaving her own kids with a neighbor. I'm sure, I said, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. He thinks I'm just going to roll over and accept whatever scraps he throws at me. He's wrong. The past month had been a masterclass in investigation born from desperation. I'd learned that the blonde woman was named Melissa Grant, a paralegal at David's firm who'd started working there 8 months ago. I'd learned that they'd been seen together at restaurants across the Twin Cities, that David had opened a credit card in his name only and run up nearly $15,000 in charges, hotel rooms, expensive dinners, jewelry that certainly hadn't been for me. Most damaging of all, I'd learned that David had been telling people at work that our marriage was over months before Emma was born. His colleague Brad Morrison, whom I'd met at the firm's Christmas party last year, had been horrified to learn that David had filed for divorce the day after Emma's birth. He told us you two were separated, Brad had said when I called him, pretending to be confused about some misunderstanding regarding David's relationship status. Said you were living apart, working out custody arrangements. Man, I had no idea you were still together when the baby was born. That's really messed up. Armed with this information and a growing file of evidence Rebecca had helped me compile, I was ready for the meeting David's attorney had requested. According to his lawyer, David wanted to resolve things amicably and minimize trauma for everyone involved. What David wanted, I'd realized, was to control the narrative and get out of his marriage as cheaply as possible. The elevator ride to the 23rd floor felt endless. Emma stirred against my chest, and I rubbed her back, through the carrier, taking comfort in her warmth. She'd become my anchor over the past 6 weeks, the reason I got up each morning and the motivation behind every difficult conversation I'd had to have. David's attorney, a silver-haired man named Charles Hoffman, met us in the reception area. He was exactly what I'd expected: expensive suit, firm handshake, and the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. Mrs. Richardson, thank you for coming. I believe you know my colleague, Mr. Richardson? David stood up from a leather chair near the windows, and for a moment, I was struck by how different he looked. He'd lost weight, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he wasn't sleeping well. Part of me felt a flicker of satisfaction at that, while another part, the part that had loved him for 8 years, felt sad for what we'd lost. Hello, Sarah, he said quietly. You look good. I didn't respond. Emma chose that moment to wake up making the small sounds that meant she was getting hungry, and I saw David's eyes flick to her with an expression I couldn't read. "Shall we get started?" Hoffman said, leading us to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Mississippi River. Rebecca arrived 5 minutes later, her presence immediately changing the energy in the room. Where Hoffman was all polished charm, Rebecca was direct and no-nonsense, spreading files across the conference table with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. "Before we discuss settlement terms," Rebecca began, "I think we need to address some irregularities my client has discovered." Hoffman raised an eyebrow. "Irregularities?" Rebecca slid a folder across the table. 3 months of systematic asset. Depletion from joint accounts. Credit cards opened without my client's knowledge. Evidence of an extramarital relationship that began months before the separation. I watched David's face as Rebecca spoke, looking for signs of remorse or shame. Instead, he looked annoyed, like a teenager caught breaking curfew. "My client's relationship status during the marriage isn't relevant to asset division," Hoffman said smoothly. "Minnesota is a no-fault state." "You're right," Rebecca agreed. "But fraud is relevant. Hiding assets, depleting joint accounts too, finance an affair, lying to colleagues about separation status. These things matter when we're discussing custody and support." David finally spoke up. "I didn't hide anything. I used our money, yes, but..." "You used money saved for our daughter's needs to pay for hotel rooms with your girlfriend," I interrupted, my voice steady despite the anger burning in my chest. "You told your coworkers we were separated when I was 7 months pregnant and still making you dinner every night." The room fell silent, except for Emma's soft breathing against my chest. David stared at the table, his jaw tight. "What do you want, Sarah?" he asked finally. It was the first time he'd asked me anything since walking out of the hospital 6 weeks ago. The question hung in the air, loaded with everything we weren't saying about love and betrayal and the future of our daughter. "I want you to be honest," I said. "With me, with Emma, with yourself. I want you to explain why you chose to destroy our family instead of just talking to me about whatever problems you were having." David looked up then, and for a moment, I saw a flash of the man I'd married. Vulnerable, conflicted, human. "I fell in love with someone else," he said quietly. "I didn't plan it. I didn't want it to happen. But it did, and I couldn't figure out how to tell you. You were pregnant, and you were so happy about the baby, and I felt trapped. So you decided to wait until after I gave birth to blow up our lives? I thought..." He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized from years of watching him work through difficult problems. "I thought if I could get through the birth, be there for that, then maybe we could figure out a way to co-parent without too much damage." "Without too much damage?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "David, you served me with divorce papers while I was recovering from childbirth. You left your newborn daughter in a hospital and went home with another woman. How exactly did you think that would minimize damage?" He didn't have an answer for that. The meeting stretched on for 2 hours, hammering out the details of custody schedules and asset division. David would have Emma every other weekend and 1 evening per week once she was old enough to be away from me for extended periods. He'd pay child support based on his salary at the law firm. We'd split our minimal assets 50-50, though Rebecca made sure the credit card debt he'd run up financing his affair remained his responsibility alone. Through it all, Emma slept peacefully, against my chest, occasionally stirring to eat or be changed. I found myself wondering what she'd think of all this someday, whether she'd understand why her father had chosen to leave, whether she'd forgive him for abandoning her in her first days of life. As we prepared to leave, David approached me hesitantly. He gestured toward Emma. "Can I hold her for a minute?" I looked at him for a long moment, this man who'd given me the greatest gift of my life, and then tried to throw it away. Emma was stirring, her tiny fist escaping from her blanket, and I realized that whatever David had done to me, she deserved to know her father. I carefully transferred her to his arms, watching as his face softened when she looked up at him with those serious dark eyes that mirrored his own. "She's beautiful," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "She's so much bigger than she was in the hospital." "She's growing fast," I said, surprised by how normal my voice sounded. "She smiles now, and she's starting to hold her head up during tummy time." For a few minutes we stood there like any normal parents discussing their baby's development. It was a glimpse of what could have been if David had chosen differently. "I'm sorry," he said suddenly, still looking down at Emma. "I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. You didn't deserve this." She didn't deserve this. No, we didn't, I agreed. But we're going to be okay. Both of us. He handed Emma back to me, his fingers brushing mine for just a moment. I know you are. You're stronger than I ever was. Outside the law office, Jenny and I walked through the skyways connecting downtown Minneapolis, Emma content in her carrier after being fed and changed. How do you feel? Jenny asked as we headed toward the parking garage. I considered the question. 6 weeks ago, I'd felt like my world was ending. Today, I felt something different. Not happiness, exactly, but a sense of forward momentum. Tired, I said finally, but hopeful. For the first time since this started, I feel like I'm moving toward something instead of just surviving. And David? I thought about the way he'd looked holding Emma, the genuine regret in his voice when he apologized. I think he's realizing what he gave up, I said. But that's not my problem anymore. That evening, I sat in Jenny's living room, with Emma on my lap, going through job listings on my laptop. My maternity leave was ending in 2 weeks, and I needed to figure out what came next. My old job at the marketing firm barely paid enough to cover daycare, and with David's child support, I could maybe afford a studio apartment in a questionable neighborhood. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was a life I could build. What, about going back to school? Jenny suggested, settling beside me with 2 cups of tea. You always talked about getting your master's degree. With what money and what time? Student loans exist, and there are programs for single mothers, evening classes, online options. I looked down at Emma, who was studying her own tiny fingers with the intense concentration that only babies possess. The idea of going back to school had always been a someday dream, something I'd pursue when we were more financially stable, when the timing was right. But maybe there was no perfect time. Maybe the best time was when you had the strongest motivation to build something better. What would you study? Jenny asked. Social work, I said without hesitation. I want to help other women who are going through what I'm going through. Women who feel like their world is ending and don't know how to rebuild. Jenny smiled. That sounds perfect for you. As Emma fell asleep in my arms, I started researching graduate programs in social work, financial aid options, childcare resources, for students. It would be hard, probably the hardest thing I'd ever done. But for the first time since David had walked out, I felt excited about the future. I was 28 years old, with a 2-month-old daughter, and a divorce to finalize. I had less than $2,000 in the bank, and no clear idea how I was going to make ends meet. But I also had something I'd discovered over the past 6 weeks. An inner strength I'd never known existed, forged in the fire of betrayal and tempered by the fierce love I felt for my daughter. David had tried to write the ending to our story. But he was wrong about one thing. This wasn't an ending at all. It was a beginning. 2 years later, I stood in the kitchen of my small duplex in the Longfellow neighborhood, watching Emma toddle around the living room with the determined concentration of a child who'd recently mastered walking. At 26 months, she was all personality, curious, fearless, and blessed with a laugh that could light up the darkest days. The March afternoon sun streamed through windows I'd finally been able to dress with real curtains, instead of the bed sheets that had served as temporary window coverings for the first year. It wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that required creative maneuvering to cook anything elaborate. But it was ours. "Mama, look!" Emma called out, holding up a wooden puzzle piece shaped like a giraffe. She'd been working on the same animal puzzle for 20 minutes, her little face scrunched in concentration. "Good job, sweetheart," I said, stirring the pasta, sauce that would serve as dinner. "Can you find where the giraffe goes?" I was expecting my friend Rachel any minute. We'd met in graduate school, both single mothers trying to balance coursework with parenting, and had formed the kind of friendship that's born from shared struggle and mutual understanding. Rachel's daughter Maya was 6 months older than Emma, and the 2 girls had become inseparable. The doorbell rang, and Emma squealed with excitement. "Maya! Maya!" I opened the door to find Rachel balancing Maya on her hip while juggling a bottle of wine and what looked like takeout containers. "Please tell me you didn't cook," she said, pushing past me into the living room. "I brought Thai food because I know you've been living on coffee and determination this week." She wasn't wrong. Finals week of my second year in the MSW program had been brutal, and I'd been surviving on whatever I could eat one-handed while studying or chasing Emma. "You're a lifesaver," I said, accepting the containers. "How did your presentation go?" "Better than expected. Professor Williams actually smiled, which I'm choosing to interpret as high praise." Rachel set Maya down, and she immediately ran to Emma, both girls dissolving into giggles. As we unpacked dinner, I marveled at how normal this felt. Two friends sharing a meal while their children played. 2 years ago, I couldn't have imagined this life. I'd been so focused on survival, on getting through each day with Emma, that I hadn't dared dream about what happiness might look like afterward. "So," Rachel said, settling onto my secondhand couch with a plate of pad thai. "Have you heard from David lately?" The question didn't sting the way it used to. David had become a peripheral figure in our lives, present enough to maintain a relationship with Emma, but distant enough that his absence no longer felt like a wound. "He's supposed to pick Emma up on Saturday," I said. "His girlfriend's pregnant." Rachel nearly choked on her noodles. "Melissa's pregnant?" 7 months along. Emma's going to have a half-sister in May. The news had come through David's attorney, rather than from David himself, part of a formal notification about changes to the custody schedule. Apparently, Melissa wanted to reduce David's weekends with Emma once the new baby arrived. "How do you feel about that?" Rachel asked carefully. I considered the question, watching Emma and Maya build an elaborate tower with blocks. A year ago, the news would have devastated me, proof that David had built the life he'd always wanted, just with someone else. Now it felt more like information than betrayal. "Complicated," I said finally. "I'm happy for Emma. She's always wanted a sibling, but I worry about how this will affect their relationship. David's already inconsistent with visits." It was true. In the 2 years since our divorce was finalized, David had canceled or rescheduled his weekends with Emma at least once a month. Work emergencies, travel, plans with Melissa. There was always something that took priority over his daughter. Emma had stopped asking when Daddy was coming after the 3rd canceled visit in a row last fall. At not quite 2, she was already learning that adults didn't always keep their promises. "His loss," Rachel said firmly. "That little girl is extraordinary." She was right. Emma was extraordinary, bright, funny, empathetic in the way that only children who've been deeply loved can be. She spoke in full sentences, could count to 20, and had an uncanny ability to sense when I was having a hard day, offering unprompted hugs and sloppy kisses that never failed to restore my perspective. "Speaking of extraordinary children," I said, "how's Maya handling the potty training?" Rachel groaned. "Don't ask. Yesterday she peed on the living room rug and then tried to clean it up with my textbook on child development. I'm pretty sure there's some irony there." We spent the evening the way we usually did, talking about school, comparing notes on parenting challenges, and marveling at how quickly our daughters were growing up. After Rachel left, I got Emma ready for bed, reading 3 books and singing 2 lullabies before she finally settled into her crib. The house felt peaceful in the way it only did after Emma was asleep. I poured myself a glass of the wine Rachel had brought and settled at the kitchen table with my laptop, intending to work on the research paper that was due next week. Instead, I found myself scrolling through emails, including one that made my heart skip. "Dear Ms. Richardson," it began. "We are pleased to inform you that you have been selected for a field placement with Hennepin County Family Services for the fall semester. Please contact our office to discuss the details of your internship." I read the email 3 times, hardly believing it was real. The internship with Family Services was competitive. Only 6 students from my program were selected each year, and it was the perfect stepping stone to the career I'd been working toward. I wanted to call someone, to share the good news. But at 9 p.m. on a Wednesday, most people were winding down for the evening. Instead, I walked into Emma's room and stood beside her crib, watching her sleep in the soft glow of her nightlight. "Guess what, baby girl?" I whispered. "Mama got the internship. We're really going to do this." Emma stirred slightly but didn't wake, her tiny hand curled against her cheek. Looking at her, I was struck by how much had changed since that awful day in the hospital when David had shattered our world. I'd been so focused on survival then, keeping Emma fed and healthy, finishing my degree, maintaining some semblance of stability, that I hadn't fully processed what we'd accomplished. We'd not only survived David's abandonment, we'd built something better than what we'd lost. My phone buzzed with a text message from David. "Can we switch weekends? Melissa has a doctor's appointment Saturday." 2 years ago, a message like that would have ruined my evening, sending me into a spiral of anger and frustration about his unreliability. Tonight, it was just an inconvenience to be managed. "Emma has a playdate Saturday," I texted back. "How about Sunday instead?" His response came quickly. "Sunday works. Thanks for being flexible, as if accommodating his last-minute changes was a favor rather than a necessity born from his inability to prioritize his daughter. But I didn't engage with that frustration the way I used to. Emma would see her father on Sunday instead of Saturday, and life would go on. His inconsistency was his loss, not ours. The next morning, I dropped Emma off at daycare and headed to campus for my social work practice class. The University of Minnesota's School of Social Work occupied a modern building near the Mississippi River, and I'd grown to love the energy of the place. Students and faculty, passionate about making a difference in the world. Sarah. My professor, Dr. Martinez, caught me as I was leaving class. I heard about your internship placement. Congratulations. Thank you. I'm still processing it, honestly. You should be proud. Your work this past year has been exceptional, especially considering everything you're balancing. Dr. Martinez knew my story, not all the details, but enough to understand that I was a single mother putting myself through graduate school. She'd been one of my strongest advocates, writing recommendation letters and providing encouragement when the workload felt overwhelming. I wanted to talk to you about something, she continued. There's a research project I'm starting on resilience factors in single-parent families. I think your perspective would be invaluable, both as a researcher and as someone who's lived the experience. Would you be interested in collaborating? The offer was unexpected and exciting. Research experience would strengthen my resume and give me a chance to contribute to knowledge that could help other families like mine. Absolutely, I said. When do we start? That afternoon, I picked up Emma from daycare and took her to the playground near our house. It was one of those perfect spring days that make Minnesota winters worth enduring. Warm enough for light jackets, with that particular quality of light that promises longer, brighter days ahead. Emma immediately made friends with another toddler at the sandbox, and I found myself chatting with the child's mother, a woman named Lisa who'd just moved to the neighborhood. Are you from Minneapolis originally? Lisa asked, watching our daughters collaborate on an elaborate sandcastle. Born and raised, I said. Though I feel like I'm seeing the city with new eyes lately. Having a child changes everything. Tell me about it. My daughters taught me more about patience and resilience than I learned in 30 years of life before her. Resilience. The word seemed to be following me today, and I found myself thinking about Dr. Martinez's research project. What factors had helped Emma and me not just survive, but thrive after David left? Part of it was practical. The support systems I'd built, the education I'd pursued, the fierce determination to provide Emma with stability and love. But there was something deeper too. Something about discovering strength I didn't know I possessed. Do you work? Lisa asked. I'm in graduate school for social work, I said. Just got accepted for an internship with the County Family Services Department. That's amazing. What kind of work do you want to do? I want to help families in crisis, I said. Particularly women who are dealing with divorce, domestic violence, single parenthood, situations where they need both practical support and someone who understands what they're going through. Lisa smiled. Sounds like you found your calling. Maybe I had. The work I was preparing for felt like a natural extension of my own journey, taking the hardest experience of my life and transforming it into something that could help others. That evening, after Emma was in bed, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and started outlining ideas for Dr. Martinez's research project. What had made the difference for us? What factors had allowed us to not just survive but flourish? I thought about the first few months after David left, when every day felt like a struggle just to function. The turning point had been deciding to go back to school, not just for practical reasons, but because it gave me a sense of purpose beyond survival. Then there were the relationships I'd built, with other single mothers like Rachel, with professors who saw potential in me, with neighbors who offered support without judgment. The community I'd found in graduate school, where struggling to balance parenting and academics wasn't shameful, but simply part of the journey. Most importantly, there was Emma herself. Loving her had forced me to become the person she needed, me to be strong, stable, hopeful about the future. In trying to give her the best life possible, I'd discovered capabilities I'd never known I possessed. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed David's number, which was unusual. He typically communicated through text messages. Hello, David. Hi, Sarah. Is this a good time to talk? Emma's asleep, so yes. What's going on? There was a pause, and I could hear voices in the background. Probably Melissa and her friends. I wanted to talk to you about Sunday, he said. About spending time with Emma. We already worked that out. You're picking her up at 10. Right, but I was thinking, maybe we could do something. Together, the three of us. Take her to the zoo or something. The suggestion caught me off guard. In 2 years of co-parenting, David had never suggested spending time together as a family unit. I don't think that's a good idea, I said carefully. It might be confusing for Emma. I just thought... His voice trailed off. I've been thinking about things lately, about the choices I made. I know I can't undo them, but I want to be a better father to Emma. That's good, David. She needs consistency from you. But that doesn't require us to spend time together. No, I miss what we had, before everything fell apart. There it was, the conversation I'd been expecting for 2 years. David's regret, his recognition of what he'd lost, his desire to somehow resurrect what he'd destroyed. David, I said gently, what we had is over. It ended when you chose to leave. What matters now is your relationship with Emma. I know that. I do. It's just hard sometimes, seeing how well you're doing, how happy Emma is with you. I wonder what would have happened if I'd made different choices. You can't change the past, I said. But you can choose to be present for Emma now. She needs her father to be reliable, to show up when he says he will, to make her feel like she's a priority in his life. I'm trying to do that. Then keep trying. But don't involve me in your regrets about the past. I've moved on, David. I'm happy with the life Emma and I have built. After I hung up, I sat in the quiet kitchen, processing the conversation. 2 years ago, hearing David express regret would have devastated me, or filled me with hope that we could somehow find our way back to each other. Tonight, it was simply sad. I felt sad for the man who'd thrown away a family because he was too afraid to communicate his feelings. Sad for Emma, who deserved better from her father. Sad for the time we'd all lost to his poor choices.